Can we test, make sure I can hear, please?
Of course, you
Thank
sure can. And
Got
this
it.
is Janet Estervig. And
Thank you.
as I pull up my screen, I can tell you a little bit about myself. Welcome to all of you. We have 192 so far. That's great. I am here in Wisconsin with Attainment Company, and I am a special ed teacher. I taught special ed in the early years, and then I started my own supported employment agency in 1983. So I'm a vocational rehabilitation counselor, and that's for 25 years. I place students and adults with disabilities in jobs with more significant disabilities or with definite complex needs. And then one of the individuals I was supporting went on a ventilator, and so I went back to school and became a registered nurse. So I'm also a nurse. So talk about an interesting combination of special ed, employment services, and then also a nurse background. And so I was able to really look at how you support people very practically. So I actually was his job coach and nurse when he was on a ventilator. So so I know all about, catheterizations and vents and G-tubes and J-tubes. And so I'm very familiar with all of that, but I actually knew this all before I ever became a nurse. So I'm going to share with you some of the materials that we have. And I'm going to share my screen with you. And please, you are very welcome to email me or add the email in the chat there's my email, janet@attainmentcompany.com. I can send you a certificate of participation. I can send you the copy of the PowerPoint, but I also have done webinars the last couple weeks as well. And if you want to see those recordings, I'm happy to send you a Google link of those as well. So I am now going to mute everybody again, just make sure we're all muted. And then I'm going to start with talking about this. So we're going to go for 45 minutes to an hour, but there's so much I have to share, so I suspect it's going to be that full hour. So employment for students with complex needs. Now here's the thing. IDEA says that we are actually meant to prepare all students, and it doesn't say just students with mild disabilities, it says all students with the free and appropriate public education to prepare them for additional education, employment, and independent living. So the whole idea of transition planning is really the critical piece of this, and I am a believer, of course, in the fact that people with all disabilities should be, or all students with disabilities should be a part of what we're going to look at. And honestly, I placed someone in a job, even, the only thing he could move is his arm. He was in a wheelchair. He couldn't even sit up. He had to lay flat in this wheelchair, very small man with cerebral palsy. And so I totally understand all those personal care needs and all the needs that students will have. So I speak to you from definite experience. So here's my 6 things I'm going to talk about today is, yes, you can work. You can work and maintain Social Security benefits. Again, most people are not going to work off. They can. Students can work off Social Security benefits, and often a student might be eligible until 18 and then are not eligible after 18. So oftentimes when we think about, can I have a job? And many parents are very iffy about, I don't want my son or daughter to work, I don't want them messing with their employment. So yes, you can work and maintain Social Security benefits, because often that's your personal care worker, that's your long-term care supports. Everyone has gifts and skills. It's more about our job on how to translate that into what a person can do in a work task, no work situation. 3, you can find work, but it's often finding a niche. We call this customized employment. Vocational rehabilitation pays adult providers to do customized employment, and that's often what we're going to look for in students with complex needs. There will be an acceptance of the uniqueness of each individual in work settings with the right approach. So how are you going to be talking to the employers? And I'm going to talk about that. Number 5, I'm going to talk about how you're providing personal care with privacy, both in the community and in a workplace. Done it, did it, done it. And then number 6, when there is an expectation of employment for all students, the teachers, support staff, family members, community, it will happen. So I want you to feel free to think of, I see the chat room is still moving along, and so put your email in there or email me if you want copies of this. So let's start with number 1, Social Security benefits. Let's just get this conversation out of the way. So part of it is there is a lot of complexity to Social Security benefits. A student might be on SSI, Supplemental Security Income. There might be, they may be on SSI and move into SSDI when they become adults, or if their parent dies or retires, one of their parents. So they get Social Security from off of their earnings. So that's called Social Security Disability Insurance. There are 2 different kind of programs, and they're vastly different in how earnings are counted. So just so you know that, when a student's on SSI, and the thing is, a student also, there's earned income credit. Well, I'll tell you about that in a second. So I just want you to know there's a difference between the 2. You don't have to be an expert on Social Security, but just to know that there is going to be some limits on how much you might earn based on being able to keep your benefits. But just finding that out and learning that. In the SSA's Red Book is where it's a condensed version of how to get information about employment-related provisions, part of Social Security, SSDI and SSI. Now, just so you also know that Social Security Administration has been trying to look at pilot programs to really build employment outcomes for youth. One of them was called the Promise Grant. And this Promise Grant was really looking at youth getting SSI and moving them into jobs. The thing is, as Social Security still has many disincentives to work. And this is a real problem for students or adults with physical disabilities trying to have a job that's still getting their personal care paid for, a job that pays, a full-time job. So there are still disincentives, so don't get me wrong, that still exists. But for those students that have complex needs, we are talking now about how do we build this connection between employment outcomes and then keeping benefits. So getting benefits counseling, most voc rehab, vocational rehabilitation counselors offer this service, but there are other organizations, maybe your independent living centers, that do benefits counseling for free for students. And so this is something to have a conversation with your families to look at, because you do need benefits to get those long-term care services and healthcare. Healthcare is critically important. But there are some incentive programs, an IRWI, a PASS plan, Ticket to Work. There are ways for students to move off of Social Security if that's the goal. And I'm going to talk now mostly in the future now as if they're not going to use that goal. And that why I say that is because so many of those students with complex needs need the Medicaid for medical benefits. Here's a couple resources. One is the Red Book specifically has resources for youth, because there is a student earned income exclusion. A student can earn up to a certain amount and have nothing affecting their SSI. So that's really good to get students that first work experiences. All right, so Social Security is that's a whole day topic of training. We can't delve into it in the details. Just know that you can work and keep benefits, but you may need to limit the number of hours and the income. All right, number 2, everybody has gifts and skills. I am absolutely a believer in that, and I've always looked at what is it that that student can do? What can they do? We always, I know, we often are deficit based because we have to look at how our goals and our IEP goals or any kind of learning objectives, how are they going to help that student gain skills? And so you always look at deficits, but now let's think this differently. What is their skills? What are their preferred environments? What activities, when are they at their best? All right, maybe it's that huge smile, and that's the one thing that they do. Well, now I think, what could I have a job where somebody's going to be, there may be some good customer service, or maybe there's going to be just a connection to people. How can we really build on that smile this person has? So I look at what strategies have worked with the student and what are some ideal working conditions for that student to be successful. And if they're not successful in environments that's noisy or lots of people, or then don't look at those kind of jobs. Look at jobs that are maybe smaller, fewer people. So you think about what is it that's worked? What are ideal working conditions? Now, what are some of the skills? But then also know what should be avoided. Where should you be avoiding things? Maybe this person's a major drooler, and so you're not going to place them in a food service, or maybe even working with paper. And you got to think about what is it that the drooling, and how do you help with that? Because you want that person to be more socially accepted. And when there's drool coming down their mouth, it grosses people out. I mean, let's just be honest. So we want to think about what can we do? We've had students put wristbands, and those wristbands get changed frequently. And so we teach them about keeping that wristband and wiping that, and then just making sure that to be more independent if they're able to lift their arm. If not, then making sure the attendant with them is keeping their face clean at all times. What should their work week look like? If they need a lot of personal care in the morning, then not looking at morning jobs, maybe afternoon jobs. What are things that full day work, it's only going to be a part of it, because we're probably going to need to limit the number of hours if we're going to keep the benefits, remember. And so what else can that work day look like that's in that day, that meaningful day can look like for that person and that student. So thinking about beyond just employment, what are ways to build health and fitness? Can teaching daily living skills? Are there volunteer opportunities? My program that I ran for many, many years, ran personal care and employment services. We were 100% community-based. And so we did not have facilities for people to go into. So when we had to think about, all right, there's a time in the day where this person needs to get out of their wheelchair. There's a time when we need to change the depends. Where are we going to do that? We thought about all of these things, and we thought about where in the community we could do that, or maybe returning home for that time period and going back out again. So we were always thoughtful about where we can build the support and connection to people with complex needs in their community. And then, like we talked about, that need to maybe limit some hours. So I'm going to give you some examples. I love examples. So those are the stories you're going to know, remember. So one is Barry was working, a warehouse was just too echoey, too large. He had the disability label of autism, not that that's unique to just that, but just to kind of give you an idea. So Barry just struggled with those kind of environments. So going to a sheltered workshop absolutely was out of question. So we said, okay, what can we do to find a job in the community? So we went to this local insurance company. It was a small office. He was able to move about the office. He did pick up recycling. We looked at jobs that this employer needed doing that just wasn't getting done. He also delivered mail. He collated. He was the fastest envelope stuffer. He used to stuff these flyers that they did so fast. And then he would create all of these training materials for them. So his job was part-time. He'd go there in the mornings, and he would do that in a quieter environment that worked best for him with fewer people. Shane has a hearing impairment. Now, he could hear some, but not much. He also had a bit of a visual impairment. And he had, okay, the disability label is significant intellectual disability, whatever. He lived in an institution, but he was moved into an adult family home, and he makes noises. He would go, so yeah, I mean, he makes noises, and he likes making noises because he likes the vibration. So we actually had two jobs for him. I only listed one here, but one was in a laundry room where machines were going, and he did all their folding. Because he could see well enough to fold, and we made sure there was a brown table, white towels. He could fold those towels. He was fast, and he liked it, and he made his noises, and it didn't matter because machines were going. The employer knew he was going to make noises because we talked about this, and he became, they had a hard time finding people to come in and fold the towels because it was a lot of towels to do. The second job he did was at a church. He loved the vibration of a vacuum cleaner, and so he would stop sometimes and just feel that on his ear, and he loved that, and he loved the lights, and so he'd wave his hands to the lights. Okay, so here's Shane working two jobs with a disability label of a pretty complex need, but we looked at how we could address the behaviors that draw attention to him in a way that didn't matter. And so we found job sites that it was okay, it didn't matter. And so Tanya, so once in a while, well, no, she was kind of someone who would swear and she'd say inappropriate things. She was tough person. And so Tanya had some mental health issues. And so we found a job. They were doing this really neat work setting for some people in there were from the homeless shelter who also said inappropriate things. And she was kind of part of this group. They were very accepting, and they did this food prep in this kitchen. They made their homeless shelter, their made high-end products. It was really a neat idea in this kitchen. It was all, certified kitchen, and they would sell them and to high-end restaurants as well. So she was working in an environment that sometimes if she went off, they were like, whatever, that's Tanya, because it was just the most accepting work environment. And we had to find one that we knew would accept her for who she was. All right, so Jim was somebody, I think I mentioned this in a past webinar, but he's somebody that had schizophrenia. And so he would talk to voices. And again, talking to voices freaks people out. So we found a job in, it was this interesting insurance company. They sell insurance for your appliances in your house. Anyways, they still did a lot of paper, and so they needed someone. They had a huge file room, and the filing just would pile up and pile up and pile up because nobody liked to do the filing. But Jim was meticulous with his filing, and so he would file in the file room, talk to people, talk to his voices. And we again explained what he might do, and that it only if they felt that they were concerned, they would call us. So he worked independently. He was an amazing worker for them, and they got connected and they became very loyal to Jim. And so they would go in if they saw things, heard things were starting to get revved up. They go, Jim, you okay? And then sometimes he was, and sometimes he wasn't. When he wasn't, they'd call us, and we'd come in, see if we could help calm Jim down or maybe take him home. So that was a building and accepting work environment. All right, Mark has Prader-Willi syndrome. If any of you work with students with Prader-Willi syndrome, it's a disorder where it's an eating disorder. They're always hungry, never full, and will often just eat anything, food from the garbage. Some have different levels of disabilities with this Prader-Willi syndrome. So of course we can't place them in a job with food. Although every work setting has lunches and some refrigerators and food. So what we did, we found a job at the state hygiene lab, and he washed all the test tubes. Now, not everybody with Prader-Willi could do this because some people might drink things from those test tubes, but that wasn't his concern. That wasn't a problem with Brian. He was, or Mark, sorry. Mark. So he would clean up he would wash those. Just, again, a great worker, great job. But the staff knew they couldn't put food on the desks. We kind of went around and said, this is his disability, and he also appreciates it. We actually did this really neat meeting at lunch where he and I talked about Prader-Willi syndrome. We did a little vague lunch meeting, and we said, this is what the disability is. And he got to talk about what it was like to live with this disability, because it is very, very challenging for him too. And so he talked about, if you leave food out, it's hard for me. I'm going to be I'm going to go after it. I'm going to find ways to get that food. It's just what I do. So again, really great environment. And then Rebecca, she's in a wheelchair, and so we had to find a job that also allowed her to manipulate the data that she was entering into the computer. And so we found a voice-to-text software, and so that she could enter data, but she needed to be in a space that wasn't with the other staff, because that, someone talking all the time would be distracting as they're doing data entry. So we found a separate area where she could do her voice to text. She was able to speak, but she had difficulty with her hands and was in a wheelchair. So you see what I'm doing? I'm trying to think about jobs, but also work environments that will be a good match for that student and their uniqueness. So as you're gathering information about the student, what are their goals in life? What are their fears? Because sometimes they may have some concerns or fears. The Mark, who has Prader-Willi syndrome, would say, you know, I'm afraid I'm going to eat so much I'm going to die. And so he talks about how that fear is, and he says, and I make people's lives really bad and hard because I want that food so bad. So we just had this conversation. And then what do people consider is that person's greatest barrier? If maybe it's just physical barriers, well, then where can we think about work environments that would overplay those physical barriers? That, okay, what can we find in work environments that wouldn't have those barriers? Or again, it might be also their emotional barriers. So can they work with a large group of people? Can they have customer contact? Can they work, do they need just getting instructions from one person and with very minimal verbal interaction? Some people don't do well with a lot of talking. And then what are their passions? What do they think about? What do they think about when they're out of school? And then again, the hours, and then thinking about other activities. Again, work might not be their whole day. Okay. Yes, you can get a copy of the PowerPoint and everything. So yeah, I see people are putting things in there. Just send that to me. Okay, so so thinking about those activities. So now we're going to look at what are some work opportunities you can do with students. And when you think about that, you think about what kind of community connections can you make? So using these job shadows, temporary work experiences, having tours, start getting your students to go get out and understand what's out there. But you see, when you bring students with more complex needs, you might have to, you know, sort of prepare the employer. Maybe there'll be some connections that you already know. I really like the idea that there might be people you know at that workplace, and so bringing the student there for a chance to see what's part of a job. Sometimes it's also getting the family on board as well. And so really knowing what has worked well, what doesn't work so well, what were some challenges when you were out in the community, maybe not even at work settings, but maybe you were in other situations in the work community, in the community like in shopping, if you're grocery shopping, what are some of the triggers? What are some of the concerns? Okay, I'm seeing some of these things. That's helping to tell me what might be my concerns when I'm actually have the student in a job. So the third thing is customized employment. So what is customized employment? So this is really redefining what a job description might be. It's having a conversation with the employer and thinking about what are some specific jobs, especially if the student has you know, more significant intellectual disability. Then we're going to be talking about jobs that we pulling tasks. So they may not usually they don't fill a complete job description. We're pulling tasks, we're developing new job descriptions, we're redefining a job. And how we do that is that we talk to the employer specifically about what is it that maybe is going on in your place of business that doesn't get done every day that you'd like to get done. What are you paying overtime for right now? What are some tasks that staff would really prefer to be focused on another work, and you would be able to think about what would it be that student would want to do that you could fit at niche. I call it niches. And really, they talked about customized employment on Department of Labor website, as you can see. Don't forget to talk about, there is work incentives, there's tax incentives, WOTC, work opportunity tax credit. Employers can get those. Your large corporations are all set up for this. They have computers where the student puts in their disability. It's also for ex-offenders, people with disabilities. It's for a larger group of people, but the student, the employer is allowed to have a tax credit. So we talk about this, if you use these terms in a lean business, so if you use these terms when you're talking human resources, it is the idea that as a registered nurse, I should be doing only work that a registered nurse who's being paid at a registered nurse's wage should be doing. what is that nurse doing? Is she in there filling all of the blankets in the blanket warmer? No, is she cleaning all of the examining rooms? So you think about what is it what could we bring somebody in to do specifically that would be making their lean project, and many companies have lean projects going on right now, of how to be more efficient with their staff. So if they have salespeople, you want them on the phone doing sales, not filing all of those records if indeed they're still using paper. So you think about efficiencies within a department and talk to the employer about lean and what are some of their efficiencies. Are they working on lean business concepts? And then where are some of those niches that now we can think about students going in and students with more complex needs filling in those niches. So here's some examples. Again, I like to give examples. So we've had people working in nursing homes and assisted living, and these are called ancillary staff. So in most nursing homes, the certified nursing assistants, the registered nurses, the licensed practical nurses, PT, OT, all of them are Medicaid billable hours. So whenever they're meeting and directly and connecting to the residents, those are Medicaid billable or Medicare billable, but it's all these other positions aren't. And so like your dietary and your custodial and whatever. So one of the things I talk about is you want your CNAs to be doing as much hands-on time with those residents as possible, because that's the hours that count. Whereas let's have a worker come in part-time, restocking the rooms. Maybe they're transporting people to their appointments. That's been a big thing for a larger nursing home. That was a big job that we had somebody do all the time, taking them to their appointments, their hair appointments, they're going to the rec room. So the CNAs never had to go off the floor. We also had people coming in and just doing bed making, and then the CNAs also weren't doing that. They're doing the hands-on care. And most nursing homes are always short of certified nursing assistants. I would say that's an issue across the country. And because of that, then you can say, well, I know you always have at least 1 or 2%, or at least 10% actually of your work staff as CNAs are not here. So let's make best use of that. Another one was in an office setting. Could you have somebody answering the phones? Can they transfer calls? Sometimes now with voicemail, all they need to do is transfer a call. They don't have to answer a lot of questions. Maybe they need to date stamp all the mail that comes in. One of the things we had at our personal care agency is we got lots of material coming in every day. And so everything had to get date stamped. And then we had one of the workers there doing so that the front desk staff is doing their work, so doing copies for people. Again, efficiency, lean, and so we created a little tag to attach to whatever you wanted copied, how many copies, double-sided, single-sided. We listed the things, the staff just checked it off, paper clipped it, threw in the basket, and that was one of the jobs of this individual. We had at the bus barn, the drivers, when they're out driving the buses, when they come back, their job is to clean the bus. But again, to be more efficient, and because there always is such a shortage of drivers, they said, okay, all you need to do is clean the outside. And sometimes we had people that didn't do that either. And then we had people come in, we had 2 guys come in and they cleaned the inside of every one of the buses. Just a kind of a carved out job. At our Pepsi plant. And all of you probably have Pepsi, Budweiser plants. We have several of those around here. And one of the things is that the drivers bring back product all the time. They bring back cans and bottles, either that are expired or maybe one in the tote was burst and got them all dirty. So that was a sorting process in the back. So they recycle, they empty cans and bottles, they put all the sugar soda that's expired, goes to the food pantry, all the diet sodas expired gets dumped, and then they recycle all of this, or they wash the cans or bottles and repack them. So this is a job. I mean, this is a job that the drivers were doing. Again, a far more expensive prospect. Cook's assistant, we had a guy working at the Denny's, and so the cook was having to do all this food prep. So instead, the cook or the chef can focus their time on their skills. And so we had Charlie going in, and he did all their food prep. Every day he had pictorial list of what he had to do, and he was a guy who did a lot of racking. He was a rack. And so he'd be racking, and so one of the jobs he'd do is he put the bacon on these wax paper, because then the cook just grabs the wax paper and goes. And so he'd put his one on and another on. He was the fastest worker they ever had in the kitchen. So, I mean, it didn't matter that he rapped. You know, we always think, oh, they can't do this, but yes, this webinar is being recorded. I keep trying to look at that. And you can definitely get a copy of the recording. Just email me at janet@attainmentcompany.com, and I'll show that to you again. At urgent care, we had somebody who did all the restocking at the clinic in the rooms. Again, that you're not having nurses doing this. I'm checking refrigerator temperatures. These are jobs that they're small jobs in all of these different businesses, and we find them by having a conversation with the employer about what is it that they need doing. What would be a niche that we could have a student come in and do? Number 4, acceptance by the employer. So this is really important that you build these relationships. So if I had a student that was coming out of the school and into our program in the adult service system, and there were challenges. There were some situations where, you know, the noises, like Shane with his noise, we already had relationship with that hotel from a previous employee, and we had placed there. And so I try to go to the places that I already have a relationship with that business for your more challenging students, because now they've built that relationship with you. And I'm going to try this student out in a job. It may work and it may not, but they now won't say, well, I'm not going to have somebody in this place ever again because they just smashed all the ashtrays in the room or whatever it was. And so, you know, you don't lose that connection because they know and trust you. And so that's a part of it, is really building these relationships. And so that you can give all your students the chance to try out jobs in the community. And you really want to show that you have expertise. You do know the student well, and you're bringing in this individual to try out a job, and you want to see how they can do. And so it really is a process. So that introductory meeting, this is so important. So remember I was talking, like, for example, Barry, who works in the office. Of course, I first talked to Barry and his family. I want to share with his coworkers information about Barry before he starts working there. And so one of the things, because when he walks in the door, the disability is obvious. It's not like I'm sharing any secrets. They're going to see that he has a definite disability. So one of the things I want to do, though, is I want them, when he walks in the door to start a job, is to see beyond that disability, to get to know him. These are called social stories, too. But the idea is that I'm going in, again, I've gotten permission. I'm going in there, I'm going to meet the co-workers and talk. Sometimes the worker comes with me. It kind of depends. Now, Barry couldn't have handled that situation. Whereas I had another gal, her name was Janet. She came in with me. Like I talked about Mark with the Prader-Willi syndrome. He came and talked about Prader-Willi as well. So it depends on the student. So I talk about that. You know, Barry is so motivated to work, and he really wants to work here. And I talk him what he's going to do, what his skills are, and then I give him some idea of other things that he's interested in. So I make a personal connection. So Barry he's a great Special Olympian. He brings home gold and silver medals, and talk about, he loves to go bike riding in his neighborhood. And now when they meet Barry, and Barry is never going to shake their hand and talk to them. I mean, he doesn't, that's not him. But he's going to come in and focus on that work. And so one of the things I want to explain then is this, I want them to think about him as a Special Olympian, or him bike riding, or something about his family works at the local car dealership. You know, just they travel to Turkey. I mean, just give some world experience about this person. Then I want you to tell them what you're going to do. Why are you following Barry around? Why are you teaching them this job? What's going on? Now, you can't get into, well, what medications is he on? That's not what we want. And people may ask that question, don't get me wrong. But you're going to say, or why is he that way? I mean, did his mother do something to him? You know, there's still people who have this thing, thinking that, you know, autism is caused by the mother. So really I know. So really getting rid of those questions by saying, you know, no, this is just who Barry is, and normalize who Barry is. That's really what I look at in this process. He is never going to shake your hand, but that's okay because that's just hard for him. And people go, yeah, no, I understand. Or sometimes when he goes in the bathroom, he flips the lights on and off. And so I just warn people, he'll turn them back on. Just if you see the lights flicking on and off, it's probably because Barry just walked into the bathroom. You know, it's those kind of forewarning, because it's going to happen. And I don't want that to get employees, coworkers freaked out and say, well, we don't want him working here. So it's demystifying the disability. And as you're training people in the job, so really train them with some task analysis. I have a whole thing on systematic instruction. So I just wanted to say, give tools, find ways that that person can learn the job well. It might mean pictorial, it might mean using a schedule of some sort, but really doing reminders, and don't have that student not understand soft skills in the family. So really knowing you need to be on time, you have to be reliable, you got to show up, you got to wear your uniform, you have to know how you're looking that day. You need to take that shower, even though it's a challenge and the family really struggles with it. We had one gentleman, actually the guy that worked at the bus farm, he wore a uniform, coveralls. And so he took a shower, because there were showers there in the bus barn for the drivers. He took a shower before he started work, because not that the work made him dirty at all, but his family couldn't get him to shower at home. And so we actually did the shower at work, and he was fine with that. And so we had staff trained on how to do that and make sure he would be safe in the shower, and he'd change into his work clothes, and then he'd change back into his home clothes. So here I want to get a little bit into that personal care in the community. So we have to, I think, about, you know, very respectful, as non-intrusive as possible. You don't walk in a nurse's uniform saying, we're going to take you to the bathroom now, you know, no. So it's really being respectful about how you're interacting with that student when you're going into the job. Always being on time. If that person is in a job and needs personal care, assistance in the restroom at 11:30, showing up at 11:30, and dressing appropriately for the work setting. Like I say, we have hired CNAs, certified nursing assistants, to provide personal care, but they must wear street clothes. It looks weird to walk into a work setting, I suppose, unless you're in a nursing home. But then people are going to think you work there. And then making sure you're discarding. We had a woman who self-cathed herself at work. And so she would just throw the stuff in the garbage, you know, and I was like, ugh. People were freaked out. They saw these stuff in the garbage. They're like, what is that? You know, and so really helping understand. And then, of course, if they're doing any kind of injections or diabetic support, making sure that there's sharps on containers. And sometimes you can just get a small, instead of that big red thing, some companies have them in the bathroom, but otherwise we get a small laundry detergent, because that's thick enough, and then they can put it in their backpack, just a small one, and then they can put their sharps in there, or you can as the provider. So you don't want to draw attention to yourself wearing scrubs. You want to enter the building in a respectful way. And then I really am big on not being on your phone when you're doing personal care, especially if you have to feed somebody. Don't park in unauthorized places, and just being respectful that you're going into a place of business to provide personal care. Always use people first language. Watch what you're saying. I do not like that you're saying disabled student, the student with a disability. And there's a great article that talks about that. People in the community are going to use non-people first language. So just help them by, you know, being their role model. Model appropriate language and model the correct words. So you're not going to say, well, I'm here to see the Downs. And trust me, I have heard this. And so just being very respectful to help. And if people will say that to you, well, the Downs guy is over there. No, his name is Matt. And yes, he does have Down syndrome, but Matt, you know, but of course, don't make that face. And then being careful with HIPAA. People do often ask inappropriate questions. Sometimes they're asking about medication because they want to steal it because they think people with disabilities might have some opioids. Just so you know, this is really becoming a concern of people bringing medications to work. So really, you can't give diagnosis. You're not giving, you know, medical history. You're not telling them any of that. So instead, I just say, well, thank you for your interest in Mary, but you know, your privacy is important to you, so we also want to respect Mary's privacy. Or, you know, I'd love to introduce you to Mary. She's would love to meet you. You know, so really helping to build those connections, because sometimes it is just out of curiosity and just wanting to know who that person is. So there's some YouTubes on, boy, we are right on this one right now. Hand washing and gloves, and I've talked about this in the expanding employment opportunities for youth. Anything that you can do to promote hand washing and how to put on and take off gloves, because the healthcare industry will continue to be a growing workforce area for your students. And so thinking about, even many of them receive a lot of care in that healthcare field. So if they're going to the hospital a lot, they go to the clinic a lot. Now let's say, well, maybe they could get a job in a healthcare setting that they're really comfortable and familiar with. And I always look at, when I need to assist someone in the restroom, I think about, okay, if I can get single stall restrooms, that helps because they're larger. Sometimes you have to look at family restrooms. That's easier. It doesn't always work. So even sometimes I think about, if I'm out in the community, I think about bathrooms. Am I going to take this man into a male bathroom or a female bathroom? And it kind of sometimes depends, but most of the time I'm going to go into that male bathroom. I'm going to tell you how to do it. So again, making sure, can you, maybe in that work site, can we have a cabinet there for their supplies? Maybe it needs to be locked because you're going to have maybe wipes and disposable wipes. You might need gloves in there. So thinking about what that person may need. Maybe they self-cap them, you know. Maybe there's equipment in there for G-tube feedings. So just remembering, and we always try to use flushable wipes at work. It's just easier, of course. And so you're not throwing things that smell in the garbage. I'm getting right down to the basics here. So this is what I put out on a sign whenever I go into a men's bathroom and to assist with my worker. So I put, female assisting male in restroom will be done shortly. Thank you for your patience. So this is what I do when I'm thinking about I'm in a community setting or even at a work setting. And then at a work setting, I try to find times that are not as busy, like at break time, everybody needs to use the bathroom. I don't want to block up the bathroom for others. So thinking about times that you can be more respectful of other people who need to use that bathroom. And again, many of them will have individual stalls for people with this, in a wheelchair. And quite honestly, as we all know, that isn't always big enough. At a swimming pool, I've gone to the family restroom. You might have some students that use ostomies, and if you do, there is some things that you want to make sure that you're being careful, thinking about. Anytime they have to be burped, and anyone has used has helped a student with an ostomy, the air gathers in there. And that smell is not pleasant. So make sure there's air freshener. Just be mindful of the fact that there's going to be other people coming into that bathroom. Sometimes that it comes off. So you may always need to have a change of clothing. And then you may need to have another bag in there that can be clipped on. Sometimes those just break down. So there's a video on ostomy care. And then, like I say, always having a change of clothes for people who might be incontinent. And then thinking about if someone is in a wheelchair, is there a place that you can help change them? Sometimes wheelchairs go down flat, but that's a pretty fancy one. A lot of them don't. So is there a place that you can, the person can transfer in order to get the change of clothing? And then the perineal area, I'm just going to tell you, it's so important that we make sure it's clean and dry, because the skin can break down so fast. So one of the things I always have people do is just to put their finger on their hand and press hard. If you're pressing hard on that finger for 1 minute, you're going to find that you've already made a mark, a white mark on that spot. And just think about 1 minute, think about people that are in their wheelchairs all day. So making sure that if they're knowing how to do exercises to go up and down, or to getting them out of that wheelchair. But anytime they're using the restroom and making sure that you might be using urinals, someone might have a catheter, suprapubic catheter, whatever they're using, making sure that you're familiar with it, and sometimes those leak. We have people who use condom catheters, and that's been very effective to help them if they have a physical inability to use a restroom. And so transfers, some of you may or may not be doing transfers, but just a lot of the stalls are not really good for that. So thinking about how, if you don't have to transfer somebody, that's really critically important, but making sure you're really positioning yourself well, and that the clothing you're wearing and they're wearing, the gait belt. I mean, there's just so much about transfers. As you already know, you really need to follow your body mechanics. And what's the protocol for transfers in the community in public restrooms. So have this conversation with your supervisor, or what is it that your school or organization requires for that. And again, always trying to respect privacy whenever possible. And I got a YouTube video on safe transfers. So here's a system with eating. Some of your students may need that. Remember, when things are microwaved, they're hotter in the middle. And so really helping this when you're actually feeding a person. And one of my biggest pet peeves is people who I've seen at the mall feeding somebody and talking on their cell phone or checking their Facebook and really not paying any attention to the person. That is my pet peeve. So also not blowing on it, how to assist in medication administration. And so really looking at like if the person needs liquids, maybe having one of those longer glass or rubber straws, hard plastic, so that they can drink themselves. If they can't use their hand, they have quadriplegia, and so they can get their drink, they can lean over and drink. And that independence frees up the support staff tremendously, actually. And then thinking about how to set things up. Sometimes you may just need to set things up, but don't have, unless the person is uncomfortable, they should be eating with their coworkers. And if it's if it's a G-tube feeding, just make it like anybody else is eating. Just hook it up. They're eating from a bowl in liquid. So make sure you're really clear about it. This is really a thing about, talking to people when you're feeding them, to say, what would you like next? Or I'm going to give you this next, or would you like a drink now? Really just focused on, prevention of choking and aspiration. That's a huge problem for people with quadriplegia, is aspiration and pneumonia, and it can lead to death. I really big on grooming, that if that person is unable to groom themselves, that you make sure they look good, food is off their shirt, and that their teeth are cleaned, whatever it takes. We want that person to look good when they're out in the community and in that work setting. And this talks a little bit about mobility. These are medically oriented tasks that you might be doing or might not be doing, but just knowing that these are considered under our Medicaid rules of personal care. These are considered medically oriented tasks, and people need to be trained on that. And catheterization actually is off that list now. I should take that off. A nurse cannot train somebody to do that. I cannot delegate that task. Even though mom and dad can teach you how to do that for somebody. We did catheterization for both male and female as job coaches, and not when I was a nurse, but when we were job coaches. G-tube feedings. So just really, if you are responsible for blood sugar checks now, there's such convenient ways to do all this now, and just making sure that the person, just because they have a medically oriented need, they can still be in the community and they can still have a job. It's just looking at when those tests need to be done, when you need to check. And then really that skin integrity, maintaining that, so critical for that individual. Oh, this is where I talk about children are often present at the pool when I'm trying to help dress and undress somebody. And we always go to the family room because it's male or female. And they'll ask questions. Tori always got questions because he had a ventilator. And the kid would, what is that on your neck? And he goes, well, this helps me breathe. And he always looked at this. The first line of education for children and adults is to really understand and to be comfortable, and again, demystifying the idea that if a person's on a ventilator, they're still a person. So one of the things that I did on this PowerPoint is to add ways to look at supporting individuals with challenges. These are more what I would call behavioral challenges, and whatever terms you want to use, but basically we really want to help that person. We had someone working in a job 2-on-1 with him. He was very physically aggressive, and we looked at what could we do. We found a work setting that would be safe. He actually worked in this bowling alley upstairs in their banquet room. And eventually the idea is that he can work more and more independently and work in settings with more people. But we started in a more isolated setting to really build our knowledge of how to support him and to build his acceptance of learning what it means to have a job. And when he starts getting frustrated, learning ways like mindfulness to really help him through those times without hurting himself or anyone else. So we look at that ABC, you know, what happened right before the incident, what actually happened, and what was the consequence. And then looking at what can we do differently the next time, and to really communicate with the person. Sometimes I'm not the best one for people who struggle with a talker, because I'm a talker, I'm a blah, 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 blah. So I have to really know that that can be overwhelming to some people by giving too many instructions, talking too much, and really listening to your words, your tone, and how you're communicating. So these are some ways that you can look at what we talk about. One of the things we did is always making sure that there's a safe exit for the staff. If they're in well, you probably know this for classroom settings too, that there's a door that is safe. There's a chair between you and the person, or a table, so that if they reach out to grab you or scratch you or bite you or hit you, what are some ways we can really help staff know how to deal with this? And so one of the things we looked at is what safety first, always safety for both us and the person with the challenge. So we came up with plans. We always had an action plan. And we looked at what do we do before we walk into a work environment? How do we prompt? How do we establish, these are the rules, or if sometimes the word rule might be a trigger, so we aren't going to use that word, but these are the rules. That when you go in, you can't touch the animals without asking, or you can't go up to that mother and talk to them. Okay, remember the rule, personal space. Oh yeah, personal space. Okay, so I said, when you see a baby, what are you gonna do? So I do that foreshadowing. I think I talk about this in here. You know, foreshadowing and thinking about what are you gonna do then? Okay, hands down, don't scare mother. You know, the kind of things that we have this conversation. And then really trying to keep things in routine. Do they know what's coming next? So I would have a schedule for that person to have, who was very filled with anxiety about what happens when. So the routine was written out for him. So he was really clear about what comes next. There are certain things we avoided. We knew were triggers. We positioned our body in a way, in a car. We had a person that we sat in the back seat. We transported them to the work setting, but we had a board across the the seats. So we just attached it to the 2 seats. It wasn't a restrictive measure because it was just a board basically behind their seat. But it prevented that person from reaching across and getting at the steering wheel, but also the control panel, you know, the control thing. So so you couldn't all of a sudden put your car in park. So we safely had him in that back seat, but we did a preventative measure to be able to transport him in a car. And then, of course, redirecting. Quite often a person starts getting filled with anxiety and they're thinking through things, and then we go, hey, what about that truck? Whoa, look at that. You know, just total weirdness, just something totally out of the norm. And then it just takes them out of that moment. And that's that I've used that so many times. It's very effective. So number 6 is planning for a full life. So typically the work may not fill those 30, 40 hours a week. And so we want to balance paid employment with other activities. So what other things can that person do? What are some other opportunities? They love working with animals. Can they volunteer at the shelter or at one of those like more private places that have animals that they adopt out? So what are things that they could do to give back to their community? And then braiding that together. So there is a process through Medicaid funding. What are you doing that's employment related? What are you doing that's called community-based services? Usually they're called day services. Habilitation is the actual term. But they typically, people go to a building for habilitation services or day services. But with the new changes in federal law called Home and Community-Based Service Final Settings Rule, there is now a requirement for these facility-based programs to be more community-based. So as students, think about what more can we, how can we connect that student to their community and really gain their knowledge about what is available and braid this funding when they leave school to both day habilitation or day services, which could be volunteering, it could be going to the gym, working out, taking a class, learning daily living skills, learning personal care skills, you know, all of this, braiding them together. I call it braiding or joining that funding, so that now you have both employment for part of that week and other activities for the other part of the week. But all of it being 100% in the community. So where can you actually do personal care? So there might be a gym where there's showers. Could personal care be provided there? Is there a local a YMCA with a swimming pool with a family area where you could be able to have people, whether male, female, being able to help and assist them? Sometimes I would go to the men's restroom in the women's section of the department store because there's very few men there. And so that would be a nice quiet place that I could then assist him in the restroom. And so these are all, you know, really training, teaching these skills, and including wellness, and bringing your OT people in to help you really think about how could we have this person do this kind of work and practice things in the classroom that could come up with adaptations and ways that they could do this job with their physical limitations. And of course, always building those soft skills. So I'm going to just quickly tell you the stories, Becky and Paul. So here's Becky and Paul. So this is how we braided it. So each were employed at this assisted living facility for 15 hours per week at $10 per hour. Both of them were getting SSI, SSDI. They actually were both getting combination. So Becky was working in the office. Paul worked in the dining room. And Paul's the picture on this below. And so Paul, we had a cart that he could push with his wheelchair. He was very strong upper body. And so he cleared off all the tables, put them in the bins, wiped them down, went to took that all to the kitchen, came back and reset all the tables. And these happened to be tables that there were no chairs around them already. So they actually went up into the ceiling. So we would provide both of them with the personal care. So we had one job coach at the work site supporting both. Paul was very independent, but they'd all need some assistance in the restroom. So the job coaches were trained by their families on the support that each of them got. So Paul was transported in a regular car because he could shift over and transfer himself. Whereas Becky had a van that actually lifted and took her. So he ate lunch at the local YMCA, and then he participates. Look at all these. I don't know why I have all these marks on here. Must be, oh, I see, I'm doing things there. Okay, so Paul can eats his lunch at the Y. He gets physical therapy, getting his exercise routine and his upper body strength, and he volunteers in an after-school program in the afternoon at the Y. So there we built in a morning work, an afternoon, lunch, and then some physical activity for building his strength, and then some volunteer. Whereas Becky, she ate lunch at the assisted living facility with her coworkers, and in the afternoon, she took the paratransit to do her afternoon. She went to Anytime Fitness, she volunteered at the animal shelter different days, she took a cooking class, and then once a week she met up with what we call our lunch bunch. It would be some consumers or clients who knew each other from school and get together on Friday afternoon, and sometimes they go to lunch, sometimes they go to a movie, they did different things together. So here's some employment oh, I spelled employment wrong. Here's some employment resources, and then I thought examples of students on the job with more significant disabilities. Let's Get to Work is a great resource for schools. Here's a path to employment. Here's some Explore-Work, which is a cool way for exploring opportunities for students. And then Skills to Pay the Bills is a curriculum, free curriculum from the federal government on soft skills. So there's my email, and I'm sorry I went a little bit over. I knew I probably would, and I'm trying to tell as many good stories as I can. But if you want my webinar, if you want a copy of the PowerPoint or a certificate, just email me at this email, janet@attainmentcompany.com, or I see people are putting that in the chat room. And I thank you all so much. I hope I gave you some ideas and some confidence and maybe even some reinforcement to get out there and really look at ways that your students can make connections into their community. So thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.